Really? Okay. Welcome. I don't know how to begin podcast nowadays. Welcome out there on the YouTubes and Spotify. Welcome to the JustDQ podcast, Canadian edition, where we're not focusing on cool shit like comics and music and manga, which is not really that cool to begin with. But we're talking about Canadian politics because we're Canadian.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
joining me is Ian, and Ian's a friend of mine. He's also Canadian, and I brought him in to give some back and forth and banter on a topic
Hello.
that's pretty fucking boring.
I mean, it is boring, but on the other hand, it's also incredibly important, and sometimes it's very engaging because over the last couple months, a lot of us have sort of become super upset and frustrated with the way things have gone, and there's no better way to voice your frustrations than through showing it in a federal election. So yeah, let's do
Exactly.
this.
And so I don't know. I don't remember when it was announced, but I remember it being announced like was it late September, early late August, early September?
Yeah.
And it's yeah, I felt it was very sudden, um, but overall, I really haven't heard many people that have already voted. But voting will happen on September 20th. So this is one of the shortest election campaigns ever.
Yeah, it caught a bunch of people off guard simply because it obviously in the middle of the pandemic, and Trudeau had in the past mentioned that he promised that he wouldn't call an election during the pandemic, and yet he's gone back on his word. Very interesting. He, yeah, I'm still at a loss for words because this whole campaign has just been smeared by narratives that are pretty one-sided, and I simply feel this might be a bit nihilistic. I think that perhaps Trudeau called this election because he's so out of touch with the general populace that he thought he could win. Because quite frankly, when did he win the last election? What, 2018 or something like that?
That's usually like 4 years or 3 years for an election. Well, that's
Yeah,
the last one.
because I think in at least for Canada, it's not like the States where an election is held every 4 years. In Canada, I believe it's 5 years. There's a 5-year limit, I think. And the Prime Minister has essentially the right to call an election whenever they feel like it in order to reset that time frame. So
Yeah,
the pessimist, yeah, there you go. Andrew Scheer. I completely forgot that dude was the Conservative nominee.
Yeah, he left out of personal reasons, I think.
Right.
This sounds so funny because there's such leaders without much character, but when it comes to
Ooh.
that, I don't think we should look
You know
for
what? I'm
much
looking at these
character.
candidates. They're all the same except for the Conservative leader and the Green Party leader. Elizabeth May stepped down.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
yeah, she stepped down right after the last election or something along those lines, and she was replaced by that lady there, Annemie Paul, who is actually from Toronto. Um,
okay.
as a as a leader, she's actually come under scrutiny in recent times as a result of her perceived lack of leadership over how the party is treating essentially dissent. I forget what the topic is. Obviously, did my research, but from what I remember,
Really?
there was a segment of Green Party members who essentially dissented from the rest of the party, and there was infighting, and people stepped down, and other people asked for Annemie's resignation as a result of basically her inaction. She didn't speak up, and I guess her party didn't really see that as a thing a leader should do. They thought that a leader would be able to unite the party better. And yeah, she ended up. Oh, did you lose me?
No. Well, maybe.
No,
I think your face to me
I'm
is frozen.
frozen. I'm frozen. I'm.
Oh, oh, oh.
It's the
Ooh, the
Green Party.
robot.
The Green Party is
Oh,
obviously
there.
hacking our podcast because they don't want
Yeah.
you to spread the truth
Yeah.
as to
Well,
what's
it
going
doesn't
on.
matter. It's on the news anyways. This is what happened. Here we go. We got internet. We got ad blocker detected. But you know what? That won't stop us. We're still gonna find out what happened. So the Green Party and its governing body have legal proceedings underway related to the ongoing internal party turmoil. Sounds a bit redundant. And its leader, Anami Paul.
Enemy Paul, yeah.
Interesting. The email, which one source told Global News, was sent to the entire membership of the party. Damn. This alluded to the legal action but shared no specific details, citing a disputed understanding of the confidential nature of the documents. So here's the quotation read through the email. We are writing to inform you that the Green Party of Canada and the Green Party of Canada Fund have filed an application in the Superior Court of Justice for Ontario. This application relates to certain internal proceedings of the Federal Council and Executive Director related to the leader of the party. What does it talk about? We understand that the leader is of the view that the party is bound by certain rules of confidentiality, which we dispute. As such, we will not be providing with further details. Okay, well, this sounds like a bunch
It's
of
all very
smoke
vague.
and mirrors.
Yeah, it's all very vague. Something went down. A bunch of people were upset. They looked to Enemy Paul to say something, and she didn't. But regardless, she still is the leader. She didn't step down. And she participated in both the French and English language debates. She was the first woman of color to do so, which she mentioned multiple times in the debate. And she actually had a pretty strong showing. I will say that of the 5 main candidates who were part of that debate, she presented her party's platform in what I believed to be the most succinct and easy to follow manner without like basically beating around the bush and like giving you vague logistics. She gave like straight stats and straight answers to a lot of the questions. Obviously, specifically in regards to environmental issues, but also in regards to like Indigenous relationships. Here in Canada, we're in an odd time where relations between the government and Indigenous peoples have been super strained as a result of like a bunch of essentially graves being found all over the country of these dead Indigenous children who died while they were in custody of these what are they called? Not reform schools.
They were called
residential
residential.
schools. Residential schools. Yeah. So this topic, how many unmarked graves? I think they found 600 unmarked graves.
Oh, man.
And another 215 bodies.
Yeah.
This is just in one residential school out in BC. So Canada, a lot like the United States, has had strained relations with their native peoples. And in this election, this topic has taken front stage.
Yeah, well, one of the things that the Liberals said they would do is to help the Native population in very practical ways. One of them was providing them with clean water. Well, guess what? The water is still murky as fuck. So if we take their word as their word, doesn't hold much versus what action they've made.
I mean, that was the sense I got during the leadership debate. It was very much the Liberals saying that they have practical means of solving the myriad of issues that the government is facing. Yet other leaders have pointed out that every time they bring up targets, they fail to make these targets. And it was very interesting because it felt like all four leaders, although they had vastly different perspectives, all basically ganged up on Trudeau, and quite frankly, rightfully so, due to the Liberal government's ineffectiveness in delivering on the promises that they made over the last couple of years.
So maybe there's a chance that the parties will combine together.
Oh,
I don't know if they can do that.
I don't think
They
so.
can?
They're
No.
all vastly different in terms of how they want to go about solving various issues. I got the general sense that the NDP, they're that party that promises the moon and the stars and can't give you any like concrete logistical means by which they can solve these problems other than taxing the super rich. There was one specific moment, I will say, that was a Trudeau victory. I forget what the exact issue was, but essentially Jagmeet Singh, the NDP leader, started going off on Trudeau for missing various targets in regard. I think it had to do with like taking care of the elderly, because that was another issue. That was another issue during the pandemic. During the pandemic, a bunch of these nursing homes were found to basically be mistreating a bunch of these seniors, and a lot of seniors died, and a lot of abuse was uncovered. So obviously this was another big issue that took front stage in the election, and Jagmeet Singh was going off on him, saying, oh, you promised to fund the senior homes and whatnot, but you failed to deliver, blah, blah, blah. And Trudeau, he just, in the middle of Jagmeet Singh's like rant against him, is just like, well, at least I have a plan. Unlike you don't even have a platform. And it was just a moment of hilarity, in my opinion, because it's true. Like they say that they're going to do things, and they offer no clear-cut solution or clear-cut targets as to how they're going to go about achieving these various things.
I think we see a good example of that in their plan, especially the fiscal plan. So here are like each party's platforms,
Louise.
depending on like what their topic is. So we got fiscal plan. Here's the NDP's their motive, their goals.
Holy cow.
They're just saying numbers at this point. I mean, billions of dollars over 5 years. I don't know how they do that.
To put things into perspective, I'm looking at this. The Liberals who are the next closest party in spending, they're going to spend only 78 billion. So the NDP plans on tripling spending.
I don't know how you get money like that. I mean, maybe you gotta bleed. So you donate the blood.
They would, yeah. I mean, people like us would end up having to foot the bill for that stuff. That's what I would assume.
I know. Where are they gonna take it from?
Yeah, I know. Like they say they want to go after like billionaires and like those super rich, but here's a news flash for you. The super rich are super rich for a reason, because they have really skilled lawyers and accountants who know how to find all the loopholes. And they claim that they're going to close all these loopholes, but quite honestly, I can't trust any government entity to try and quickly and efficiently close any sorts of loopholes, let alone, tax evasion.
So it sounds like there's a bit of a, I feel like there's a pessimism that floats across the vibe of voters, regardless of, I guess, their age group too.
Yeah.
But like, I always wondered what's the motivation behind voting, knowing that no matter who is voted in, there's like a lack of transparent change. There's a lack of change in terms of
In general,
quality
yeah.
of life, man. Like quality of life, I think should be a standard by which you can grade whether or not your government is effective. And the older I've got, is that what happens to old people? They become more pessimistic, or is that just because they realize how much more bullshit is around them?
I I think we become slightly more jaded, um, simply because we are able to compare things from the past with how things are going now. Right. And everyone sees the past through rose colored glasses. Like, for all we know, things were just as bullshit back in the 90s. Right. But because we were children and they didn't really affect us that drastically, it didn't really matter to us. But with over the last 18 months with the pandemic, um, I think a lot of the pessimism is the result of the frustration of realizing that our governments are incredibly ineffective and incredibly oblivious to how, in regards to how to go about dealing with a pandemic and overcoming the pandemic,
Yeah.
rather than trying to address the issues at hand, which I think essentially is the burden on the healthcare system. I think the whole reason why they are trying to push for the vaccinations and they had all these lockdowns was essentially to shield the healthcare system from becoming overwhelmed, to try and prevent an issue like what's going on in India. Um, but I feel like what they did was basically just reactionary and a lot of just the blind following the blind. They had
Well,
these
yeah.
so-called. Go on.
Well, what was like? I remember you mentioned in conversation before the podcast about a certain bill that had limited the the conversation and discussion um, about COVID or about what may be considered discriminatory. What was the name
Yeah.
of that
Oh
bill?
man, it was
'Cause I
like
was looking for bills right now.
Bill C.
I saw some bills right now that the Green Party were opposed to, and these bills were mainly focused on environmental issues like oil, gas, and tankers.
Hold on a sec. Let me
Basically
look
focusing on like
here.
where you can put a pipeline, which is definitely important.
Bill C10 legislation. Here, I'll send you the link now so that.
Oh, we can share, bro. You can share too. Let's all share together. You can share your screen.
Let me see here. Apologies. I am. Oh, there we are. Okay. Oh, that's our WhatsApp group.
Oh yeah, are you sharing with WhatsApp group?
So it's on the Bloomberg website. Bill
Okay.
C10, drafted by the Trudeau government, meant to subject tech giants to the same requirements as traditional broadcasters. They say to finance. Okay. Plans.
This is the Canadian lawmakers passed a bill that aims to regulate programming distributed by media streaming services and social platforms like Facebook and YouTube, a measure that critics warn could infringe on individual speech. So
Yeah.
this bill was, well, it's called Bill C10, and according to this article, it's meant to subject tech giants to the same requirements as traditional broadcasters, effectively compelling companies like Netflix and TikTok to finance and promote Canadian content. And it's weird because, as far as I remember reading from this bill, all I ever got was that they were just trying to like emphasize Canadian content.
Content.
Yeah, on like these.
I don't think this is the right one. I don't think this is the right one.
I could definitely see how they can get kind of sketchy. Because the challenge is how to regulate content on the internet without undermining individual freedom of expression. The bill's language is ambiguous at this point, according to its critics. some of it can be interpreted as saying that user activity won't be regulated, while other parts suggest that content produced on user-driven sites will be. Okay. So based on that language, we can assume that if the content isn't fit with a specific Canadian forward narrative, then it can be then regulated. I think that there must be some gray area within the actual bill in terms of determining what is, I suppose.
There's another bill where it's a lot more clear cut, where they mention essentially censorship, where the government has the ability to look at creative content, and if they deem it to be discriminatory, and they don't define that in any means, but if they deem it to be discriminatory, they have the right to pull that piece of content from whatever social media site you're using.
And that can be a problem.
That's obviously very problematic.
Yeah, I feel like the biggest problem is that, like, on the news, we don't get enough back and forth with these issues. And I do think that in private conversation, people have mixed feelings about what is happening in terms of policy making, in terms of really what's happening right now. And really, one thing that's happening right now is the how would you call it, like the delicate forcefulness towards getting vaccines in Canada, and how it's subtly yet not so subtly being implemented through media and then through these networking of various systems and institutions that kind of are seem to support one another depending on whatever is said upstairs.
Right.
And this, like, it goes down through school systems very clearly. That's the one place that I can speak on because I work within that environment. Ian works in movies and film. How has the obviously pro-vaccine approach in Canada affected your industry?
Well, in a very direct way, as a result of these various policies. It's obviously limited our ability to shoot, right? A lot of the locations we shoot at are abroad, and the issue isn't necessarily being able to get to those places and shooting. It's what happens when you come back, because oftentimes in productions you are running a very tight schedule, and a 2-week delay, which occurs when crews come back from shooting because they have to quarantine for 14 days. A 14-day delay is huge. Suddenly you have to push back shoots that you had planned years in advance as a result of that. For me, since I work in the office, a lot of the work is being done remotely, and a lot of things that could have been done just by going over to someone's desk and being like, hey, is this invoice correct, right? Can I get a copy of the production schedule? I have to do this over the email, and I end up getting responses many days late. So it just has slown things down. It's created a lot more issues that don't necessarily have to be there, but it is what it is, right? And at this point, we're simply working under the framework that's being given to us. And I think that's where a lot of frustration also resides, right? It's the illusion that you can choose how to go about things, but in reality, if you don't conform, you are making life incredibly difficult for yourself.
Yeah, there are definitely, especially in I'll say in the school system, if you have if you, I guess, are not vaccinated, fully vaccinated, you go through two different processes in order to work still. You go through two rapid tests per week, or it's not or, and you go through a educational program on the
Oh,
benefits
jeez.
of vaccination.
Oh.
I have not gone through it. Instead, I got vaccinated. So you can call me a bitch, and I'm gonna
Oh.
accept it. Um, but regardless, there is that feeling of like, how much push can you take regarding what freedoms I think this country tries to uphold and stand by. Um, but I don't know. To be honest, through traveling and talking to other people, uh, and even just looking at the news and reading about the news from other places, I get the feeling that Canadians are a bit too nice for our own better nature. Um,
Right.
and this is one of those issues where where I think personal freedoms and personal choice were never up for debate and were never up
Mhm.
for defense in the first place.
Right.
I feel like the media never want to have a narrative that could contradict or conflict with the this
The
over
overarching narrative,
yeah like
yeah,
the
that they're trying to push.
yeah. And what's really crazy is that they never try to focus on the science, and when I mean science, the effectiveness of the vaccine and any standout breakout cases. They never try to explain. Uh, for example, the fact that you can still catch COVID and the variant, whether or not you have one dose or two doses.
And
And it,
and what's worse, just quickly piggybacking off of that, just because you are vaccinated, it doesn't necessarily mean that you no longer can spread it,
mhm,
right? And
yeah,
that in and of itself is what is so bonkers to me in this specific debate. It's just the total lack of coverage that people don't realize. Like, if you just because you're vaccinated doesn't necessarily mean you can't spread it anymore. So I listen, I get why they're pushing for mass vaccinations, because at the end of the day, we're all frustrated with the lockdowns. We're all frustrated with this pandemic. We just want it to end. We just
mhm,
want it to get back to real life, right? But the problem at hand is, if we rush too quickly into this new normal as a result of these vaccinations, knowing that these vaccinations don't stop spread, you're not going to combat the numbers. Like, cases will continue to rise, and even worse, I remember reading. Hold on, let me try and pull up this study. It's a what. In any case, there was a study that was released back in 2004 that essentially stated that if you try and implement vaccinations in a time of a pandemic, right, where the virus is still around, and the vaccine doesn't kill the virus, all you're doing is providing an environment to create stronger viruses and stronger variants. And that's exactly what we have now. The Delta variant didn't occur out of a vacuum. It occurred in the environment where people who were vaccinated were still able to spread the virus, and so it mutated. That's simply how viruses work, right? And
the
to
genius is
ignore, yeah, to ignore that fact is just, it's bonkers. It's
and
bonkers
then
because
yeah,
at the end of the day, you're like, all you're doing is kicking the can down the road. It's like running a football team, right? You're signing a bunch of veterans who, they're at the peak of their careers, but they all want the max contracts. This is all in an effort to win a championship in 1 year. All right, fine. You run out that year. Let's see what happens. If you don't win a championship, guess what? Those players are still under contract. You still need to pay them. So what do teams do? A lot of the times, the teams, they backload the contracts. They just kick the can down the road. But to take a quote from Anime Paul, the Green Party leader, soon come, soon come. Okay, soon come was a term that that her parents used, and while she was growing up. She's Caribbean, but essentially, soon come means you eventually have to pay the toll, right? Eventually, you need to pay these backloaded contracts. Eventually, you have to face the fact that we're going to face an environment where we're going to have these super deadly variants, and it's all as a result of people lowering their guards, thinking that the vaccination is a cure-all to all the issues. It's not. There are far more underlying fundamental issues at hand here.
And they're not entirely complicated things, to be honest.
They're not.
They're not. Like, that's the thing. They're not. Like, the solutions to your health have been the same things for the past 20, 30 years. Like, the principles of healthy living have not changed dramatically since our parents. I mean, fucking basketball was invented in like the 19. I don't even know. It's fucking like a century ago.
Yeah, like 20s or something.
Yeah, people knew that they had to move to be healthy.
Exactly.
And a vaccine that, again, is not going to stop you from contacting this virus is something that therefore shouldn't even have a passport for. Like, this is the cornerstone to why vaccine passports are pointless. It's that, regardless of what you've taken, it hasn't changed the health of everyone around you. They're still at risk because you're still at risk. And
I just feel like at the end of the day, this whole vaccination passport was a means for the Trudeau government to try and appease as many people as they can to win a re-election. It's funny that you bring that up, because I remember when there were whispers of the vaccine passport going around. I actually emailed Carolyn Bennett, who is my MP in Toronto, St. Paul, which actually is a very interesting riding in this upcoming election. I'll go into that a little bit later. But Carolyn Bennett, my MP, I wrote a letter essentially laying out why I think the vaccination passport is a problem. And to clear things up, no, I'm not anti-vax. I had my vaccination. Was I excited about it? No, not really. If it were up to me, I don't think I would have taken the vaccine, but I ended up having to because of the passport. But in any case, I wrote a letter to her essentially saying that this is a slippery slope, and this is a slippery slope towards that. There she is. It's a slippery slope towards the government essentially passing policies without input from their constituents. And these aren't overarching policies that don't really make a difference in your everyday lives. They directly affected my life. Like, a vaccine passport meant that I couldn't go to the gym unless I showed proof of vaccination. A vaccine passport meant I couldn't go to see a movie unless I had a vaccine passport. It's just, it's ridiculous. It really is, especially considering that at the end of the day, the vaccines don't stop spread.
no,
They simply, they like, I'm not anti-vax. I think that if you have comorbidities, if you're an elderly person, if you are a person who lives with a family member who has any underlying comorbidities or is a susceptible person, it's probably a smart thing to take the vaccination. But at the end of the day, the government doesn't really have a right to tell you to do something if the alternative isn't going to kill you.
Yeah.
And that's the truth. Like,
and to be honest, there's been studies that talk about how you can protect yourself just by buying simple supplements over the counter, without having to go through a prescription, without having to put any RNA into your blood, into your system. So these simple things, you can go out there and search for yourself. I'm not that educated. But if I can learn things in 10 minutes or less by listening to people that are smarter than me, you can do it too. And unfortunately, the people that Ian and I are dealing with are people that are not going to listen to us because we're not rich, we're not powerful. We're just regular citizens. And I really feel that if I asked the regular citizens, they would wish to have more information that they can use to decide whether or not uh, they could or they would go through with it. But with funneling, this funneling system that they've been doing, incrementally increasing the intensity of their campaign, and at this point now reaching to the point where it's going to affect again your daily life, like Ian said, from basically doing regular things nowadays. Um, so Ian, like when did they tell you couldn't go to the gym? And since then, have you even tried?
So on September 1st, Doug Ford, who was one of the last few premiers who resisted the vaccination passports in Canada, essentially gave in and said that as of September 21st, you would need a vaccine passport in order to go to the gym, to go see a movie, to go to restaurants and dine indoors, um, and to travel. And when that announcement was made, I had a whole flurry of reactions because I actually wrote my letter to Carolyn Bennett 2 weeks prior. I wrote, yeah, so it's been like a month and a half at this point or something of that nature, and I didn't even get a canned response back. But I ended up deciding, you know what, this is too much of a headache, and this is an illusion of choice. I didn't really have a choice in the matter. I want to remain staying healthy. And so in order for me to access the facility that I need to stay healthy, I am going to expose myself to something that quite honestly, I probably wouldn't have been exposed to in the first place. As naive as that sounds, I actually have been quite a good boy over the last 18 months. I actually have. I have done my part in maintaining my personal health so that I wouldn't end up being in the hospital, being another burden on the healthcare system. I worked out, I ate healthy, I took vitamin supplements, including vitamin D and zinc and vitamin E. I limited the number of people that I hung out with, right? And quite honestly, over the last say 18 months on the regular, I've probably hung out with the same 5 people, all of which, majority of which have been vaccinated. So it's that thing of like, what if there's a tree in the forest and no one's around to hear it, and it falls, does it make a sound? Like this is where I was coming from. But I decided, you know what? I'm going to get the vaccine because I need to go to the gym, because I need to stay healthy. And unfortunately, I don't have crazy amounts of disposable income to invest in the personal fitness equipment that I want. And my 1-bedroom apartment in Toronto doesn't have much space. So I'm fucked. Like I was fucked. I found it interesting though. They said that you're allowed to get your hair cut or your nails done, and you don't need a vaccine passport. But evidently, in order to ensure that you're not another statistic in the hospital for other issues such as, I don't know, heart disease or obesity. I have to have a vaccine passport because the gym isn't a what's the term they use? It's not an essential service. Your personal fitness is not an essential service, guys, according to the Canadian government.
Well, because the truth is, if you just listen to the healthcare system and follow what they tell you to do, you're apparently healthy. But on a more serious note, housing is another key issue in this political federal election, and it is actually very important for men and women that are of our age group. Because if you're not from Canada, if you're from another country, you're listening to this, we're pretty fucked here in Toronto. And I'm going to specifically say Toronto because I don't live in any other place in Canada. But what I do know is that if you're living in Toronto and you're if you're like fucking 19 to 30, possibly a little bit more, you're probably living with your parents. Um, and do you want to? No. Do you have to? Yes. Because rent is a lot, owning property is a lot. And many of us don't make as much money as what is affordable for where we live. And so housing is a key issue. These are some bullet points from the major parties. Now, I'm pretty much skeptical about whether or not these things will ever change the economy because I don't really feel like they tackle the issue of foreign investors. Well, conservatives do. They say that they'll ban foreign investors not living or moving to Canada from buying homes for a 2 year
Goodness.
period, for a 2 year period, and then encourage foreign investment in affordable, purpose-built rental housing. That sounds like Toronto housing will be sold out to the Chinese. Even more terrifying having it
Oh,
by a Toronto company or a Canadian based company. In any sense, I really don't want to sum up the rest of this good stuff. But from the debate, did you get any feel that anyone
they,
caught your eye?
you know what? Funny enough, they didn't really talk about home ownership in that respect. They did sort of speak about affordable housing, but all the parties sort of retreated into just talking points and whatnot. But I'm quickly reading these bullet points, and I have sort of been paying attention to the campaign. There is something to be said about the parties finally speaking up in regards to foreign investors, because that is an issue in Toronto. We're in a weird housing bubble right now, and a lot of properties are incredibly inflated. Two of our friends, they're a couple. They recently bought a condo together, and for the amount of money that they spent on buying a box in the sky in Toronto, they could have spent, like they told me, they're like, yeah, we could have spent that same amount of money to buy a detached home in like St. Catharines. But because they work in Toronto and they like living in the city, they decided to bite the bullet and buy a box in the sky. And the whole reason why they had to do that is because foreign investors essentially are inflating property, like the value of property, by buying up these homes and then either flipping them or like paying absurd prices, essentially to not live in them. So it is promising that all of the parties have some sort of platform in regards to fighting against foreign investing.
Mm-hmm.
See, there you
So
see,
yeah,
ban for the next 2 years. See, everyone's got that.
so it sounds like they got like a nice 2 year or some sort of like plan for doing that.
Yeah, there's some sort of incentive or disincentive. But I mean, at the end of the day, like I get it. Like if you have the money and you want to buy something, like you should have the right to buy it. But if you're buying it essentially to, I mean, I'm just gonna say it, to launder money or to hide the money from your home country's like IRS or what CRA, like let's, like it's shady shit. That's all. It's incredibly shady, and I'm glad that the parties are going to try and crack down on this.
Yeah, that's something that's important for the long term of quality of life in Canada because
Yeah,
especially right now when people have been losing their jobs, um, it's really put people on the edge. And housing, affordable housing, is of course one key issue that's connected to jobs and the economy and things that I think Canadians are generally a hopeful people, or else we wouldn't have been so uh, trusting of the government.
right.
Um, and I mean, the only thing that they can do is fail us at this point. I'm just hoping that whatever we decide on September 20th doesn't lead to a downward spiral. Now, as for the voting, I mean, are you leaning towards anyone at this point? IanG?
I I've been reading up on platforms and I've been watching the news, and of the major parties, of the 4 major parties that we can vote for, I'm probably not going to vote for any of those candidates in my riding.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, this is the thing. So Toronto's St. Paul, my riding. It's a hotly contested riding that many people have their eyes on for a myriad of reasons. So Carolyn Bennett, the incumbent, she is actually the Minister of Crown and Indigenous Relations.
Okay.
Yeah, so she is like dead center of the whole residential school crises and how the government is going about trying to make things right. Right? So she's on the hot seat. She's been very comfortable here for, I want to say, the last 3 or 4 elections. She's been MP for a while, and um, all I can say is I wrote an email to her and she didn't even give me a canned response. So I'm kind of disgruntled with her. So I'm not like, honestly, I'm probably never going to vote for a Liberal candidate ever again as a result of this whole fiasco. The NDP member, Sidney Cole, if you Google up Sidney Cole, he recently dropped out of the race because he was found to have made anti-Semitic remarks on Twitter. Essentially, I think he said something about denying the existence of Auschwitz or something like that. Yeah, I know, right? And he's from the party that the SJWs vote for, and they usually go about canceling people, when they find old tweets. I don't know how long ago this tweet was made. Sidney Cole, Sidney Cole. So he had to drop out. Quite honestly, he probably didn't even have a chance because I didn't see many NDP signs out in like the areas I walk around in. Yeah,
so this guy was under fire after appearing to invent and then spread conspiracy theories.
Oh, even worse.
About Israel and COVID-19 vaccine.
Yeah, so he claimed that the whole reason why Canada had issues securing a bunch of vaccines was because Israel was hoarding them all or something like that.
Well,
so this guy, yeah, exactly, right? They're a country where they're like 80% vaccinated, and yet they have some of the highest rates of COVID in the world. Because at the end of the day, the vaccine doesn't stop spread.
No, it doesn't. So, yeah, you really have to. It's funny because we talked about this about like our schooling and stuff, but having like an eye for critical thinking, that will never go undervalued in a time like this.
Yeah.
And so, I hope that other Canadians watch this and think about sharing their opinion about what they really feel about government, regardless of who or where they are, even the internet. So, any other closing things we can say about this federal election? Is there anything that you really care about when it comes to elections?
I mean, the main thing that I cared about was the vaccine passport, but that looks like it's going through. But going into this year's election, I'm probably going to end up voting for a guy who has no chance at winning this riding. But I'm going to vote for him because I want candidates like him to continue to stay motivated and continue to want to run, because we need a wide range of voices in Parliament. And despite the fact that we've got 4 or 5 different parties in Parliament, I remember seeing a statistic: 46% of undecided voters they're undecided because they don't like any of their choices. So, if you get the chance to speak to a smaller candidate or speak to an independent candidate, chances are they'll listen to you. They'll actually listen to you about your concerns and actually have an incentive to try and make things better for you. So if you are going into the voting booth and you are undecided between a couple candidates, but you're leaning towards a candidate who you think will block another candidate that you don't want to win, don't do that. Don't do that. Like, vote for who you want to vote for. Vote for the person who will most represent your ideals of what you want. Because at the end of the day, we're their bosses, right? They're civil servants. Servants being the key word, right?
We whip them. Damn
Yeah,
straight.
we exactly. And if you don't like them, guess what? You can fire them. You have that power. So wherever you fall on any of these issues, just vote for who you think is best fit for leading the country. That's all.
Yeah. All right. I'm in the field of I vote the non-vote because to be honest, I feel that all the parties are actually the same party, and they switch jackets whenever they feel like it in order to keep playing the game.
Right.
And the game keeps spinning. And this election is just another part of the game of politics. And so we'll see what the fate of our country is in the 5 days. Regardless, we're in a new state of Canada.
Yeah.
And we're gonna have to keep our peepers peeping, making sure that whoever goes into party, whether it's kept the same or changed, that they have your best interests at heart and our best interests at heart, because they don't make up Canada, we do. So with that said, keep it together, Canada. And Ian, any parting words for listeners out there?
Hey, stay classy, Canada. Stay classy.
Yeah, where's the whiskey? This is JustDQ with another podcast with more than just me, my truest friend, IanG93.
Thank you for having me.
And love, listeners.